Is it that these guys do this every week? It's so incredible. Oh, okay. We'll do it in a little bit. So, my name again is Geoff Demon. My first name is with a G, so Geoff Demon is what some people call me, or Geoff Demon, or whatever. But it's actually Geoff Demon, and I've been professionally brewing for 20 years now. I got my start as a busboy at FreeState Brewing Company in 1989 when they opened as the original brewery in Kansas since Prohibition. And so I vaguely got an interest in beer then, but I was 16 years old, so I didn't really get to taste anything. And then... We're going
to do homework real quick, just
okay.
So I don't interrupt you when you really get into it.
That's cool.
All right. We're going to have Jeff draw a lucky winner. Anybody new in the class today? Anybody brand new? One brand new person? Okay. There's only one rule. Be quiet. All right, here we go. I'm just kidding. Try to keep it down. That's our rule. I'll just go.
What are we doing here?
Homework. Everybody that bought beer from last week, you put your receipt in here, and you get to win a bucket of beer.
Wow, this is
if we draw your name.
My name's challenging, but this name's a little bit challenging. Gerlach Hummels?
That would be it. Gerlach.
All right.
Right on. All right. Moving on.
All right. Oh, good. So like I said, I was a busboy in 1989 at FreeState Brewing Company, but I was 16, and so I didn't really get to taste the product. And I eventually went to school at KU. I know. Boo, boo, boo. But went to KU, and during that time, I took a summer and went to Montana and worked at a dude ranch in Montana and saved up enough money to take a semester off and go spend some time with some friends in Berkeley. And I slept on their couch in Berkeley, and during that time became friends with a guy named David Lowe, who's now a winemaker in Sonoma. And he was homebrewing, and I really got interested in the homebrewing. And also at the same time, I was going to various bars around Berkeley, and I had a beer called Old Foghorn from Anchor Brewing Company that blew me away. I'd never had anything like it. And so when I got back to Lawrence, two things happened. One, a homebrew shop had opened up, and I started homebrewing myself as much as I could, and did that for the next 2 summers, just homebrewing as much as I could and sharing it with as many people as I could. And I went ahead and I sent a postcard to Fritz Maytag saying, when are you going to, I think I was the original beer geek back then. I was like, when are you going to bring Old Foghorn to Lawrence, Kansas? And he sent back, he signed a handwritten letter to me, and I cherish it to this day, that, sorry, we're not going to be in Kansas anytime soon. But it did a couple of things. It solidified my interest in the culture of beer. The fact that this guy, who was the CEO of a company, was contacting me personally. And then in addition to that, so I really wanted to be involved in brewing. And I got my degree in art history, so that's not really going to afford you very much in the world. So I was either going to go to grad school or I was going to go brew beer. And so I picked up and moved to Seattle in 1995 and knocked on doors for a month until I came across Maritime Pacific Brewing Company, and they hired me on as a packaging guy, as a keg washer, and I wasn't making very much money, and my bank account was dwindling fast, so I could make $1 more an hour at the homebrew shop that was connected to the Pike Brewing Company called Liberty Malt Supply, and that was put together and owned by Charles and Roseanne Finkel, who started Merchant du Vin. Merchant du Vin was one of the original importers of some of the classic beers that I came to love. For instance, Samuel Smith and Lindemans and Eying. And so I thought it was a good opportunity. So I was a beer buyer, actually, at that homebrew shop for a year or two. And then I got the bug to, the itch to brew again. And so knocked on some doors again, and I ended up brewing at Pyramid Brewing Company for about 3 months, and that was pretty miserable. So I knocked on the door again at Pike Brewing Company and said, "Fal, you have to hire me. I can't do the pyramid thing." And so he did hire me, and I was at Pike Brewing Company for about 5 years, and became the assistant head brewer there at one time. Then in about 2002, my then wife wanted to move back to Lawrence, and so she went back for a visit, and I sent along a 6-pack of beer from Pike Brewing Company and a resume. Sent that to Steve Brott, and within a couple of days, I got a call from Steve, and he said, "I think I have a job for you." And it ended up being about the best thing I could ever do. I really love FreeState and have been there for 13 years now. So was Steve's assistant until about 2009, and we had been brewpub only until that time. And so we were cranking out about 2,700 barrels of beer, most of which was going over the counter at FreeState. Some of it was going out to accounts around the city. But we felt that, we'd kind of capped out in that location, and Steve decided that it was time to go ahead and start packaging. And so he went across town and built a brewery across town. At that time, I kind of stepped up and became the head brewer of the brewpub, and that's where I've been ever since then. And it's been incredibly fun to let my creative juices flow and come up with new beers all the time to a captive audience. And some of those beers have come, have made their way into bottles. And it's pretty cool to see that your beer in somebody's hand out at the lake or around town at the various bars. It's pretty gratifying, and it's gratifying to share with you guys. If anybody has any questions throughout the class, just feel free to raise your hand. Yes?
So how is the pyramid scheme different than what you're doing now?
It wasn't a pyramid scheme. It was Pyramid Brewing Company, but it was markedly different. It was shift brewing. So every month I had a new schedule, and I'm not a night owl. I can't function between the hours of 3 or 4 in the morning. So it wasn't right for me, and it just maybe wasn't the safest environment. That's all I'll say. Being politic. Anybody else have questions? Okay. Yeah. Actually, okay, so the first style of beer I ever brewed was I tried, like a lot of home brewers do, tried to clone something. And so when I was at Berkeley, there was this great English pub that we would go to, played classical music, and there were students studying, and there was a bank of like 5 or 6 dart lanes that actually had like dividers on them. It was a cool place, and they had Theakston's Old Peculiar there, and I fell in love with that beer, and so I attempted to recreate it. Well, so I bottled it up and put it in the storm cellar of the apartment that I was living in. Lawrence is full of these old homes in what we call the student ghetto that, divided up into apartments, and put it down there for conditioning. And when I came back to taste it, somebody had stolen all of it. So I never got to taste the first beer I brewed. So speaking of first beers, this is the first beer that FreeState Brewing Company ever produced, and that makes it the first beer that was legally produced in Kansas since Prohibition. And it's kind of a difficult beer to talk about in that it doesn't fit any particular beer style. I mean, it's close to an American brown, it's close to an alt beer, it's close to, and we've called it that variously over the years. We kind of call it an amber now. It doesn't really fit any of the style guideline parameters of any particular beer. But what it is a very delicious, malty, balanced beer that is exceptionally good with food. It's got some caramel notes and some slightly chocolatey, roasty notes that really go well with meats that have been on the grill. The name Ad Astra is a reference, and I didn't take Latin in high school, so I didn't know what it meant at first. But it's a reference to our state motto, which means Ad Astra, to the stars, and then the rest of that is per aspera, which means through difficulties. So to the stars through difficulties is the state motto. And this is certainly a beer that was born through some difficulties. So the origin story of FreeState is that our owner, Chuck Magrill, was also a home brewer, and he was really interested in the food industry as well. He had worked at a co-op and worked for a food distributor, and he really became enamored with Fritz Maytag, actually, the same guy that I wrote that letter to. Became enamored with Anchor Brewing, and thought, well, how interesting an idea to bring a brewery to Kansas. And so unfortunately the laws prohibited it at the time. So Chuck lobbied the legislature single-handedly for over a year and a half to change the laws that would enable us to open. And we opened in an old Greyhound bus depot. It was basically a pass-through between Mass Street and the alley way behind it, and there was a little office, that kiosk, that kind of akin to what you might see at a parking lot attendant, would be in, and that's all it was. So it had walls on two sides, but not on the back, front and back, and so I remember picking my grandmother up at the Greyhound station years ago. So he had this vision of putting the brewery there, putting walls up on the east and west side, and built the brewery there. And we still have the original equipment that we had in 1989. He invested well in going with quality equipment. It's a JV Northwest system, and it was actually installed by Dan Carey, who owns New Glarus Brewing Company. If you're familiar with New Glarus, they're out of Wisconsin and huge. And Dan Carey was working for a company called JV Northwest at the time, and that's who built our brewing system. Incidentally, that's also the manufacturer of the system that we have at our production brewery. But that brewery we bought used. It came out of the Widmer Brewing Company in Portland, Oregon. And they had brewed for 20 years on the system, and finally were upsizing, and it seemed like a perfect fit for us. And Steve went out there and decommissioned it and brought it to Lawrence, Kansas. So, but Ad Astra is just it's a great everyday beer.
Anybody ever had this beer before? A couple people, a few people? You guys like it? Nice.
So Malt-wise, it's got two-row. It's got some chocolate wheat in there, some caramel malts, some Munich malts, and then the hops on are Fuggles, U.S. Fuggles. It's got a color of about 28 SRM and 28 IBUs. Do you guys know what SRM and IBU are? Yeah, okay. So it's right around 5.5. Any other questions? Huh. Well, I don't know. It's the same one that probably goes with being awesome at basketball. All of them go really well with tailgating. Clearly a Mizzou grad back there. Okay, all right, fair enough. Actually, I have a stepfather who's a big Mizzou fan, and we if we were living together, we'd have one of those house divided, things. I actually cheer for Mizzou when they're playing football. I have no ill. One thing that I've noticed over the years, Missouri fans really have it out for KU fans. KU fans don't have it out for Missouri fans quite as much, I don't think, but I could be wrong. Any other questions? All right.
What are the plans for the brewery? What's the future hold?
Well, currently we're distributing in Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa, and we'd like to see greater distribution in those in Missouri and Iowa. We're planning on heading into Nebraska early in the year, and hope that goes over well. We do some barrel age releases. So we have a beer called Ode Max, which is a very large imperial stout aged in bourbon barrels, Templeton rye barrels. That we had our first barrel release of that in bottles last year at the it was a dock sale, and 70 cases sold out in 7 minutes. So wildly popular. Ode Max, OWD for like an English spelling. Ode Max, and
How long did you say? How long did you say it sold out?
7 minutes. Yeah. So we basically when we had a line of people out the door, and it was a 4-bottle limit, and we asked people, are you going to buy 2 bottles, 4 bottles, whatever, and gave them a ticket for each bottle, and we had all those people in the building in 7 minutes and sold out. So.
It's kind of funny that, I know a lot of people, I don't know how many people in this room like barrel-aged things, but it's, sometimes you come here and you might have 2 or 3 barrel-aged things on draft, or even more than that, and I can tell you that sometimes they sit there and people don't buy them. It kills me that it's really hard to make these beers. It's hard to get the barrels, it's hard to make the beer, there's very little of it available. If you ever see any barrel-aged beer and you like that sort of thing, I just encourage you to at least taste a little tiny sample if you like that kind of thing, because these guys, it's hard. It's a hard process from start to finish.
It's a lot of love.
Every bit of the way, it's a hard process. So if you see one on draft and you're interested in that kind of beer, you should taste it and see if you like it. And if you do, buy it, because it's going to be gone next time. I'm just saying. Some people don't really get that, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot of effort to work with barrels. That beer gets produced, and we truck it
to the East Side Brewery, and then I transfer it into barrels from, we have a big 7-barrel portable tank that I transport between the two breweries, and then rack it off into barrels, and then it spends anywhere from 6 months to several years in the barrel, depending on how it's coming along. So, yeah, a lot of work that goes into it, but we love it. So this next beer is one that I created about a year and a half ago. I wanted to come up with a beer that had a great deal of hop aromatics and hop flavor. I wanted it to be dry. I wanted it to have a little bit of softness from some oats that are added to it. And I wanted it to be, redolent of the experience of going to Yakima, Washington, and seeing the hop fields and selecting hops. So it's called Yakimaniac. Yakima, Washington is where the vast majority of U.S. hops are grown. And it's also where most of the apples are grown in the U.S. And every year, Steve Brott, who's the director of brewing operations, and myself will go to Yakima September or October and select the hops that we're going to use for the next year. And so we have contracts with suppliers out there, and they will give us a selection of brewer's cuts, or what they're called. They're basically like a brick of hops that they've cut directly out of a bale of hops. And then we'll have 6 or 7 different brewer's cuts to choose from. And each of those is coming from a particular lot from a particular hop producer. And then we evaluate them, do sensory evaluation on them by rubbing the hops between our hands to release all the oils from the hops. And then smell them. And you can't really taste hops other than in a product. So basically we're evaluating the aromatics that the hops have. And based on the ones that we like, we'll say, hey, we like lot 3205. And so Yakimaniac features 3 different hops, 2 of which are prominently featured in the aroma and flavor. The Centennial hops are going to be slightly, they're also called Super Cascade in some circles, but they have kind of a juicy fruit, grapefruit sort of character to them. And then Cicero hops, which were a hop that is fairly new. It was developed in 2007 by a hop breeders group. I believe that's I think that's the name of the company that was formed between these hop breeders and John Haas, which is a hop supplier, to develop new hop varieties that would be pest resistant and also have some great commercial appeal to craft brewers. And they came up with Cicero, which is this beautiful hop that has tropical fruit notes, citrus notes. And so that features prominently in Yakimaniac. When you add hops to the boil of a beer, most of you know because you guys have been to beer school a bunch, but the hops that you add early on in the boil will contribute a lot of bitterness. And hops that are added later in the boil contribute less bitterness and more aromatics. And so that was the conventional wisdom for a long time. And it's somewhat true. But in designing this beer, I wanted to capture all those aromatics. And so this features a kettle off edition. So put the fire out in the kettle, add the hops, and then it also features a whirlpool edition. Whirlpool happens to, basically at the brewpub, we take a paddle and we paddle the wort in the kettle to cause it to spin, to get all the solids in the wort to settle out into a pile in the center of the kettle so that we can then draw off wort from the side and leave all that solid material behind. So it features hop additions way, way late. And that traps in all that aroma. It's really just pulling out a lot of the hop oils. But, in doing so, we've also discovered that there is a fair amount of bitterness that gets extracted even in those late additions. So this beer, even though it has really late additions, it still has 60 IBUs. So, and it's it's the only beer that I think we've ever released that has been unfiltered. I will say, however, that most of what you're seeing is actually hop haze. So hops have polyphenols in them that react with the proteins in the beer and cause a haze. So when there's a ton of hops in a beer, generally, unless you filter out that haze, you're going to have it be hazy. Most of what you're seeing is that haze and not yeast. This beer also is the third release in what we're calling the Front Porch series. So most of you know, there's a new beer coming out every day, it seems, and it's really hard to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, with regards to beer releases, especially in six-packs. It's pretty cost-intensive. So we wanted to go with kind of a model that we saw with New Glarus, in that they kept the same six-pack carrier, but changed the labels of the bottles themselves. And so you can see, if you were to see, you're able to see the name of the beer at the top of the six-pack carrier. And we've had 3 releases, and they come out once every 2 months. And that way we're able to quickly turn around and put new beers out. Garden Party, which we'll talk about later, was the second release in that series. And then we are having the next one coming up after Yakimaniac is going to be called Frost Flower. It's going to be an Imperial Pils. So, any questions about the beer? What do people think? Does it capture those hop aromas that you would expect? Yeah. Oh, thank you. So switching gears a little bit. Oh, sorry. 60. So switching gears a little bit. It's actually pretty late for Oktoberfest. Oktoberfest runs in September, but this is our Oktoberfest, which is in the Märzen style. So the Märzen style is one that was brewed in Germany, kind of orange-hued, malty, that would be brewed in March. Märzen means March. It'd be brewed in March, and then lagered to be released during Oktoberfest. And so this beer contains a great deal of German Munich malt, and some German crystal malts to give it the color, the orange color. And it was named the best Oktoberfest in America by Draft Magazine a few years back. It's been highly rated on Rate Beer for a number of years. I think it's fluctuated between being the number 2 and the number 4 Oktoberfest beer in the world, actually, right behind Eyinger Oktoberfest. So a lot of pride in this product. It is a lager, and it uses a lot of German Hersbrucker hops in the finish. Also a great food beer. Anybody been to Oktoberfest? I wish. Was it fun? No?
So, you want to go to Oktoberfest?
You want to go?
Oktoberfest is in Munich.
Okay.
Way too many people, unless you have a company that reserves a table, you really can't sit down and get beer.
Oh.
Volksfest is in
That sounds good. Yeah. Will Volkswagen have any money for that next year? Okay. Okay.
What do you guys think of this Oktoberfest? Did you guys drink Oktoberfest? Yeah. All right. Even right now, yeah.
Yeah.
It's too late for an Oktoberfest.
Okay. All right. Yeah. It seems like they want to. We need to bring them out earlier and earlier every year. Yeah. I think we released this beer on August 1st. Yeah. Not this particular one, but this style.
Beer for people that don't like pumpkin beers, you know? I mean, how many people in the room don't like pumpkin beer? I'm just throwing that out there. Now, that being said, I think I have 7 on draft right now.
I think somebody likes them. It's just not us.
I mean, of those 7, all of them are extremely different. So, if you think you want to find one you like, you can certainly find one. From sour pumpkin to hoppy pumpkin to, black pumpkin. It's crazy. But I mean, personally, I would rather drink.
I have a friend in Seattle who Dick Cantwell, who used to be of Elysian Brewing Company, and he kind of started that pumpkin fad. Elysian has a pumpkin fest every year, and I just can't stand pumpkin beers. I love Dick, but I can't stand pumpkin beers. Yeah.
They have a pumpkin fest, and now they're owned by AB.
Yep. There you go.
Money.
Yep.
It's all that commercial.
Yep. Yep. Well, yeah. Yeah.
Is Oktoberfest and Vienna style pretty similar?
They are pretty similar. Some argue that Oktoberfest, Märzen, and Vienna are essentially the same thing, but it's hard and it's very difficult to find a true Vienna lager. They're commercially, if you look at BJCP guidelines, they say that Negro Modelo is a Vienna style, which maybe one day it was, but it's been so commodified and like dumbed down with bad ingredients over the years. So, and I've been to Vienna, and you can't find a Vienna lager to save your life in Vienna. Everybody drinks wine and wine spritzers there. They call it spritz. Well, maybe should transition into talking about our gold medal beer. Does that sound right?
Yeah, or you can talk a little bit more about some of the other beers before Folio if you want.
Oh, sure. So I think there are 2 beers that are here in Missouri, in St. Louis at all times right now, and that'd be the Ad Astra that we had first, and our Copperhead Pale Ale, which has kind of an interesting origin story. Steve, our director of brewing operations, had brewed this beer, and it was one of his early recipes, and didn't have a name for it yet, and got off his friend's porch out in the country and stepped on a twig, or at least he thought it was a twig, and it happened to be a copperhead that bit him on the calf, and so he was in the hospital for a few days, and they had a name after that, Copperhead Pale Ale, and that's been around since the early 90s, and at one time it was the hoppiest thing out there. It was an IPA. It's since, it's more of a hybrid of an American pale ale. It's got some American hops, and it's got a lot of great English malts as well. So it's got some English character to it in the malt, nutty character. It's a really nice beer. And then, I don't think that we have our oatmeal stout or wheat state golden in this market. Both nice beers. We do have seasonals that come through. The Oktoberfest is our current seasonal. The next beer is Winterfest, and that's a beer I created. That is we call it a winter IPA. It's uses a great deal of Galaxy hops, which are a southern hemisphere hop that have a pretty crazy tropical fruit character to them. And then we kind of bounce back and forth on our seasonals between hoppy beers, hop-centric beers, and malt-centric beers. So the one after that is called Brinkley's Maibach. It's a Hellesbach beer, lager, that is named after Dr. Brinkley, who was a early radio pioneer and crackpot that thought that you could solve virility issues by implanting goat gonads in humans, and and so you probably know that and he was in Western Kansas and a radio pioneer in Western Kansas. I think he even had like the Carter family on his radio program. It was like early stuff, you know. And anyway, so weird story, origin story for that name. But the next seasonal after that is our Storm Chaser IPA, another beer that I developed. I kind of like IPAs. I got my chops in Seattle where there were a lot of hoppy beers. So Storm Chaser is kind of the opposite direction of we call it a summer IPA. So it has a great deal of wheat malt in it to dry it out, give it a hint of tartness. It's really dry and crisp and refreshing. And then it has some of the same Citra hops that we have in the Yakimaniac. Not quite as intense, but really pleasant. So that's our seasonal lineup. And then, as I said, Front Porch series are going to be every couple of months. The beer that we did previous to the Yakimaniac is called Garden Party, and that's available on the back bar today. It is a American light lager that has been infused with cucumber, basil, and juniper berry. And so if you're a fan of gin, you're going to like this beer. It won gold medal in the urban spice category at the Great American Beer Festival a few weeks ago, and quite proud of that accomplishment. We beat out 140 beers to take that gold. It was the 5th largest category this year. So I had somebody come up to me and say, "Oh, I see you take the tack of entering the beer in a category that doesn't have a lot of entries." I said, "No, that's not what happened. It was the 5th largest category. It went from there was over 300 entries in IPA, over 200 entries in double IPA, over 150 entries in a new category called a session IPA, and then I think there was a barrel aged category, and then urban spice, and so it's pretty cool. If you've never been to the Great American Beer Festival, it's the world's largest beer festival and the world's largest beer competition with over 5,000 entries. And in Asheville, North Carolina, one cool thing about our industry is the sharing of information, but also, I